All right, we're going to go ahead and get started for today. Welcome to our Missouri Open Door Tech Workshop on Universal Design. Oh, looks like we have somebody raising their hands. Sherry, did you have a question?
No, I'm sorry. I must have hit that by accident.
Oh, that's okay. Okay, so for today's objectives, we are going to quickly run over the Missouri No Wrong Door overview, learn some new ideas and strategies for universal design, use Charting the Life course to help you plan and problem solve, and hear about some different accommodations and technology that can help with universal design. So for an overview of Missouri No Wrong Door, its goal is to transform the way people access services in the community. So to support individuals and caregivers to make decisions on complete and accurate information about their options. This is for anybody seeking long-term services and supports, regardless of their age, income, or disability. We have a lot of partners on this. UMKC IHD is the designated lead for that, and then we work super closely with Missouri Assistive Technology on that. I apologize, forgot to introduce myself. I am Angelina Alpert. I am a research assistant at University of Missouri Kansas City Institute for Human Development, and we are the No Wrong Door designated lead for the state of Missouri. Our Missouri Open Door series, if you haven't joined us for one before, is to open doors to integrated supports. So we host two different 1-hour live virtual workshops. The first one is our technology series, which you're at today, where we learn about personal, assistive, and adaptive or environmental technology. And then we also have our Missouri Open Door Benefit series, which just started in May. And right now we're talking about Medicare, all that there is to know about Medicare. And then that is going to move into other eligibility specific formal government paid supports, things like that. This is our integrated support star. That is where the two of those come from. The idea with the integrated support star is that you are including all 5 types of supports and services in your life so that you aren't only focused on eligibility specific formal supports. Not everyone is going to be eligible for those. And if you are, they still might not meet all of your needs. So you want to make sure that you're integrating your supports into your life. So the other areas of the star are personal strengths and assets. So that's going to be skills, anything that you're good at, any personal belongings or resources that you have. Relationships, so that's going to be anybody that you know, family, friends, acquaintances. And then community-based are places in the community that anybody would have access to, businesses, parks, local services, membership organizations, things such as that. So as I said, integrating services into your support systems is our goal with the integrated support star. Sometimes those formal services can separate a person from their family or their community. So we want to make sure that we're using all 5 types of services and supports integrated throughout a person's life, so that they are able to live the life that they want to live in their community of their choosing. So a little bit about Charting the Life course. It's a framework and set of tools to help you think differently about your vision of a good life, having high expectations, and integrating multiple types of supports. It helps you to organize your ideas, visions, and goals, as well as problem solve, navigate, and advocate for supports. So one of our tools from Charting the Life course is a trajectory. And the trajectory really aims at finding out a vision for what you want in life and a vision for what you don't want in life. So this is just a super high level one for universal design. Some things that we would want for universal design is for communities to be designed for everybody. Businesses that are accessible and homes that are accessible without modification. And then a vision for what we don't want would be community members having to call for ADA complaints and expensive home modifications. So I am going to go ahead and pass it over to David, and he is going to take us through the technology aspect of things.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Angelina, and good afternoon, everybody. David Baker with Missouri Assistive Technology here. It's been a few months since I've done one of these mods, so it's fun to be back and sharing information with all of you. And today we're obviously talking about universal design. And universal design, oh my gosh, there were so many different ways we could have gone when we were trying to put this together. So we'll share a number of things here today, but this actually could probably be a multi-part series the more I kind of dug into it and thought about it. So to give a little bit of background, as I was putting this session here today together, there are a couple of things that kind of were weaving their way through my mind as I was thinking this all through. And they kind of are the foundation underneath our topic today. The first one is the Americans with Disabilities Act, which recently just celebrated an anniversary back in July. And then the second one is a book that I read. And so kind of to expand a little bit more on that. So as I was watching some of the ADA anniversary events unfold in my community and around the United States, I kind of got to reflecting a little bit. I'm actually old enough to remember when the ADA was signed. And so I was kind of thinking about a couple of things, such as, what didn't we know when the ADA was signed? What wasn't kind of in the atmosphere, and how has that kind of affected how we think about accessibility in the United States and across the globe? What things would we have done differently, perhaps in hindsight, when the ADA was passed? So kind of got to reflecting on those, as well as the impact of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And then on top of that, a couple of years ago, I read a book that I thought was extremely impactful. And the name of the book is What Can a Body Do? How We Meet the Built World, by a woman by the name of Sarah Hendren. And this is one of those books I highly recommend. Maybe we could have a mod series that's called the Assistive Technology book series, or the Universal Design book series, or something like that. But what's really interesting about Ms. Hendren's book is that it's both fascinating and provocative, and it kind of caused me and other people I know who have read it to sort of look at the world differently than we have, and in particular differently from the perspective of people with disability. Because this book kind of drills in on how our bodies meet the built world. And that's really kind of what we're talking about when we talk about universal design. How our bodies meet the built world. And our bodies come in lots of different sizes and shapes and abilities. And that's kind of the underlying principle behind universal design, is making a world that is accepting of all the differences that we collectively equal in this world. So as I got to thinking about those things, I kind of worked them into some of my thinking about what we're going to talk about here today. So let's move to the next slide, please. And we have to have our, we always try to have a couple of things in each session that are sort of foundational aspects around the world of assistive technology. And so we've seen this slide, the levels of technology, several times, no doubt, if you've been on more than one of these sessions. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about today is going to be over there on the left-hand side. So when we talk about universal design, we're really talking about accommodations in the sense of simple modifications that can be inexpensive, they're ready to use, hopefully they're affordable. And then, some of the technology we actually are going to touch on today is more in the category of low or light tech, where there's not a lot of sophistication to it. Most of these devices are simple or easy to learn. They're readily available, especially when we talk about universal design and some of the devices available for housing, and tend to be reasonable in terms of price. So, we've talked a lot about things across the levels of technology, but today we're really going to kind of focus in on the left-hand side there with accommodations and low or light tech devices. So let's move on to the next slide. And this is, some of the stuff that I was going to actually say on this slide, I've already said. But one of the things, going back to what I was talking about a little bit earlier when I was talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act, so it was passed in 1990, and the first use or the coining of the phrase universal design didn't even come into existence until 1997. And it's generally credited, so 7 years after the ADA, is when we all of a sudden started kind of having a different way of looking at the world around us, and the term universal design popped up. So it's generally, the term is generally credited to a gentleman by the name of Ron Mace, who was a professor, I believe, at North Carolina State University. And Mr. Mace defined universal design as the concept of designing products in the built environment to be aesthetic. Keep that in mind. That's actually important, and we'll come back to that a couple of times. The designing of products in the built environment to be aesthetic and usable to the greatest extent possible by everyone, regardless of their age, ability, or status in life. So the key thing there is usable by everyone, regardless of their age, their ability, or their status in life. So that is essentially the idea of how our bodies meet the built world, and how we need to create a world that is more accepting of all the differences that are beyond us. So out of Mr. Mace's thinking and the creation of the term universal design, we've actually had several decades now of really robust discussion and thinking about this idea of universal design. And we're seeing it working its way into policy, into legislation, into the way products are designed, things that we focus on in the disability community. And to give you just an example of something that's going on in the state of Missouri right now, there's work on the master plan for aging. That was a proclamation from the governor back in January, and one of the things that is hopefully going to work its way into into the master plan is going to be emphasis on universal design as sort of a key foundational aspect of how we approach disability and aging in the state of Missouri going forward. So if we move on to the next slide, what's really important about universal design is to not think of it in a limited sense. So a lot of times when we talk about universal design, we think about it maybe in housing, or we think of it in terms of maybe kind of a checklist. These things, if they're in a house or they're in a building, we would consider this to be universal design. Not that that's sometimes not under the umbrella, but how we really need to think about universal design is exactly the way Mr. Mace laid it out a number of years ago. And that is that it is a set of principles. And in particular, there are 7 principles related to universal design. And so I'm going to kind of go through them quickly, and then I'm going to kind of loop back to them here and give some examples. So the 7 principles include equitable in terms of usage, flexible in terms of usage, that devices and environments are simple and intuitive for individuals to use, that information that we are conveying is perceptible to individuals, and that there is tolerance for error built into the devices that we are creating in the world, as well as there's not a great demand in terms of physical effort, and that how we approach things and use them are designed in a way that provides ample space and size for approach and use and all those types of things. So those are the 7 principles real quickly. So let's actually go back a slide and kind of talk about these all a little bit more. So again, it's really important that we're always thinking about these principles as a collective whole as we are looking to design a world that is more universally accepting to all the differences that are out there. So if I'm trying to design something that's equitable, I'm trying to design something that is useful and it's marketable to people with a diverse number of abilities. So it's not just designed for a particular sector, but it's designed with all the different types of abilities and strengths that we witness out in the community. And so a great example of equitable use is going to be something like a power door with sensors. It is very accepting and easy to use, and it's marketable to people all over the spectrum in terms of ability. When I'm talking about the principle of flexibility in use, it's how we design and accommodate based on a wide range of individual preferences and abilities. So another way of kind of looking at that is we're not designing one size fits all, but we're designing for the realization, we're designing for the margins. And if you are a fan of TED Talks, there is actually a wonderful TED Talk about universal design that was done early on that has a great example of this idea that comes out of something the military did in the 1950s. Just a little plug for TED Talks there. Principle 3, the things need to be simple and intuitive to use. We have a lot of different language skills, concentration levels, experience, collective knowledge, all those types of things. That's what makes us diverse. And so if we design things that they're easy to use and understand, then that is another principle of universal design. And the fourth one, that perceptible information, that we design things so that the necessary information can be easily communicated to individuals, regardless of their abilities, or in particular, their sensory abilities. So a great example of this would be a thermostat in a house that has both tactile and visual and auditory cues to help me be able to utilize it effectively. If we move on to the next slide, tolerance and error. We all are sometimes afraid of making a mistake, and we do make mistakes, and it just compounds the problem if things aren't designed in a way where the hazards and the things that I can do incorrectly, that those accidental uses aren't built in, that there's not some way of that device tolerating for error. And when I was trying to think of an example of this, the one that came readily to mind was, the fact that we now have on our computers the undo function. There used to be a time that I think a lot of us are pretty afraid of our computers, because if we did something, we were afraid we couldn't undo it. We were going to bring the whole world to a crashing halt. And so what did they do? They made them more tolerant for the errors that we make by putting in an undo function. Low physical effort. We have a lot of different strengths and abilities in this world, but we want to minimize fatigue. We want to make sure that things are efficient and comfortable for individuals to use. So we need to think about how products are designed and the world is built so that we don't have to engage or expand a lot of physical effort. And so things like levered or loop handles would be examples of this, or touch lamps that we can operate without a switch. They involve a low physical effort, and they open up the number of people then that can utilize those types of devices. And then the seventh principle, to kind of give it a little more depth and breadth, things that are appropriate in terms of the size and the space that's provided for approach, so that I can reach things, I can manipulate them, I can use them regardless of my body size or my posture or my mobility. And so controls, for instance, maybe on a dishwasher or a washing machine, those controls that are on the front and doors that open so that I can approach it, and then I have an appropriate amount of approach space around there. That would be an example of this idea of Principle 7. So if we are designing a world, and we all do a little bit of dreaming, I'm sure, about a universally designed world, these are the 7 principles that should underscore everything that we do when we think and we talk about this. And if we can continue to do more in this arena, then hopefully we will see a much more accepting world for all the diversity in terms of our bodies and how our bodies meet the world. So if we move on to the next slide, don't want to muddle the waters here, but I do think it's kind of important to point out that definitions do matter. And we as human beings sometimes might refer to various concepts using terms that are similar but slightly different. And I have observed this quite a bit when people are talking about universal design. So there's a couple of other terms out there that I see utilized quite a bit that sort of are kind of like universal design, but they also steer away from this. And so it's really important that we realize the difference between these terms. The first one is accessible design. And if we're talking about accessible design and how accessible design is actually defined, is that it's a design process in which the needs of people with disabilities are specifically considered. So if I'm designing something and I call it accessible design, my market, my focus is on designing that product so it can be used by a person with a disability, which is wonderful, but it's not quite universal design because it's not taking into consideration the other factors that maybe people who don't view themselves as having a disability might struggle with it. So it's a little bit more narrow of a definition. There's also another phrase out there that we see quite a bit, which is called usable design. And so that is where somebody sits down and they're designing a product or an environment, and their focus is going to be on making sure that it's effective and it's efficient and it's a satisfying experience for the user so that they can complete something in the particular environment in a certain amount of time. And that's a great goal. And that's kind of worked into the idea of universal design. But unfortunately, in a lot of instances, when people are coming up with usable design, they unfortunately aren't including people with disabilities in that definition, and they're not part of the process for testing that. So universal design, so how it differs from accessible design and usable design is that it's a broader concept. So it's emphasizing that all products and environments are usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. So again, much broader concept with everybody in mind and how everybody might utilize that product when it's designed. So let's kind of drill in now to move on to the next slide and give some examples here. And I can't even begin to tell you how many slides I had to kind of leave behind when I was putting this together, because there are some wonderful resources out there. And one of the other things that's kind of fun is we are starting to see the idea of universal design weave its way into the mainstream world. And it's usually sort of driven by the fact that we're an aging population. So if you are the kind of person that likes HGTV, there are some super cool, there's a couple of HGTV episodes on universal design. Better Homes and Gardens, I swear about every other month they're covering this subject. And so lots of pretty pictures out there that we can look at and kind of dream about. But the key thing is, I love the fact that universal design is kind of making its way into the mainstream environment. So we're going to start by looking at a housing situation, and we're going to start by being in the kitchen. And the reason I want to start here is because it was a great example of some of the underlying principles of universal design. And so even though we're in a house, some of these ideas would be universal design if I'm applying them to how I'm designing a car or how I'm designing a product that I can go buy at my local big box store or something like that. So contrast is a great example of how, in creating contrast, is a real important underlying principle with universal design, because contrast helps people understand the boundaries of a space. And we see that illustrated here, where we have the cabinets are one color, we have the countertops as the white, and we see that stark contrast between where the counters are and then obviously where the cabinets are. And so this is the type of thing that's really useful for people with visual impairments, but it can also be sort of a cognitive clue as well. And so there are multiple ways I can approach this and how that contrast is going to help me understand where I am in relation to some of the things that are there. About an hour ago, I ran over to Quick Trip to get a drink, and I was absolutely stunned because I just realized that Quick Trip is now undergoing another remodel. For those of you that have Quick Trips in your backyards and on every intersection. But what they are doing that really caught my attention is they're actually putting in counters that are creating contrast around the soda machines. So the counters are now much lighter, and then the lids pop out more, and it makes it a little easier for people to find. I thought that was absolutely fabulous that they were working that in. So create contrast is a basic element of the world of universal design. So if we move on to the next slide, lighting comes into play, and the idea of layering lighting. It's more than just having an overhead lamp or a desk lamp or an overhead lighting in the ceiling. We need to understand that we need to layer lighting, because if we're using layers of lighting like ambient lighting, task lighting, decorative lighting, it's going to make it easier for somebody to be able to perform in this case, tasks in the kitchen, and it allows everyone to adjust the light to their own needs. So it doesn't matter who you are. If we are layering lighting in our environments, then it's making it easier for all of us. So examples of this would be say I have some age-related vision loss, and in my kitchen I put some lighting underneath the counters. So I turn that on when I'm using my cutting board, and it's going to illuminate the area in which I'm performing that task, which is going to increase my safety and my security. And I know in some of the prior mod episodes, Scouts actually shown some cutting boards and stuff like that that create contrast that would be wonderful under layered lighting. I might need a different level of lighting to do my homework in another area of the kitchen as I'm sitting there hanging out with my family. And so, more of a decorative lighting might be appropriate there. So creating contrast, layer lighting. If we move on to the next slide, the idea of getting away from knobs really comes through a lot of times in a lot of the literature and the ideas around universal design. So instead of having knobs in which I have to use my right hand and my left hand and I have to turn them off, there's lots of ways that's difficult for a wide variety of people. So converting over to the single lever or touchless faucets ensure that all people, regardless of their ability, are able to turn the water on and off. And if you spend some time in a big box hardware store, you start looking up on the wall there, you'll see more and more of these single lever and touchlet faucet options available. So if we move on to the next slide, and this one took me a little bit of time to kind of work my brain around, because in part I live in this house that has pretty much no knobs or hardware on any one of the cabinet drawers or drawers in general. But the idea, another principle is to install cabinet hardware. For some reason, for a few years, we got out of the idea of this because, I don't know, it was a Euro look or something like that. But if I have cabinet doors and drawers that don't have hardware on them, or they have a lot of knobs on them, then they're extremely difficult for a lot of individuals to be able to grasp. But if I install cabinet hardware, especially if it's larger cabinet hardware, then there's more options for the different ranges of motion that people are going to use to approach that, to be able to open it. It takes a little bit less effort. And then another reason that this was suggested is a good idea all throughout the house and in other built environments is based around the idea that it also can improve safety because it's easier for me to be able to lock those if I need to keep somebody out of them. And there's any number of locks that'll fit in these. And so this might be, an area that we sometimes overlook what are the difficulties when people come up against cabinet hardware, and what are some of the solutions around that we might be able to use that create a more universally designed environment. Moving on to the next slide. And I know this has been touched on a few times in some of our other presentations, but it's a good universal design principle in any type of environment, and that's avoiding rugs and other trip hazards by just plain out eliminating floor hazards. But it goes beyond just the common things you think about, like rugs that folks can trip over or slide on. It includes things like the transition pieces that we often see between different types of flooring, say between a wood floor and a carpet flooring. They might have a little bit of a lip to them, or they might be something that an individual doesn't pick up on. So those also kind of constitute a floor hazard. And if we can find ways just to completely eliminate floor hazards, then we have a more accepting environment for different types of mobility. So somebody who doesn't have any type of assistive technology, maybe somebody who uses a cane or a walker, somebody who uses a wheelchair, eliminating those floor hazards makes it acceptable to all those different forms by which people motate around their home or their office or wherever they may find themselves. Moving on to the next slide is another principle here of universal design. Again, we're kind of more focused in the kitchen right now, but these things can be expanded out into other arenas as well. The use of pole storage, just a lot of ways that this makes the world easier for a wider group of people, more so than just folks that use wheelchairs. My trash, if I can make it a pull out, or my shelves, or maybe if I have a mixer or some other device I use a lot, if I can have a swing up shelf or pull down shelves for things that might be higher, it increases considerably the flexibility of use for a wide number of people. It also makes it simpler for not only for people to reach things, but for people to see things. And sometimes, as we see in the next slide, when we're talking about sort of the opposite idea, which is open shelving, sometimes if we have some cognitive issues, then, if I can pull things out and I can see them, then maybe it's easier for me to go, oh my gosh, there it is, and not have to exert as much time and effort trying to remember where something is. And we see that same idea with open shelving, which is another idea around universal design. And it kind of is in particular focused on the idea of being able to make it easier to spot items, and also making it somewhat easier for individuals to access them. But that obviously has to do with where the shelves might be. Moving on to the next slide. And I thought this was simple countertops. We kind of touched on the idea of contrast, and that's kind of worked into the idea of the countertops here. We have lots of countertops. But we don't always, and sometimes we get a little bit more caught up in what's trendy and not so much thinking through what those countertops do and how I should be maybe approaching the idea of what countertops I might select in my home or my apartment or in a workspace. With certain countertop colors obviously can be easier, but on the eyes for me to be able to recognize things, but they can also have an impact on the body. And so we'll just, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the contrast, some of the ideas around how we can focus in a little bit more on countertops in terms of making them simpler and more usable by a wider variety of people. Along those same lines, on the next slide, varying our countertop heights. Oh, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. Planned landing areas. This makes all the sense in the world to me, for everybody. And if you have ever had a family, this might even make more sense, and especially if it's a diverse family in terms of ages or body sizes or whether people have disabilities or not have disabilities. Landing zones or landing areas or drop zones, as they're sometimes referred to, are basically sort of multiple stations, flat surfaces that are easily accessible, and they might also be at different heights, but they have so many different ways that they can be used. First of all, they help us keep things off the floor, and we talked about that a few slides ago, but they also improve safety and security and ease of motion in a lot of different things and for a lot of different daily tasks that we engage in. So the example would be, if we see in this picture here, there's a landing area that's that table, and right across from that table on the right-hand side is the oven. So if I'm transferring something from the oven, say I have some weakness, I can't hold things that are heavy for a very long time, I can simply move it out of the oven straight over to that landing area. I'm not going to have to worry about maybe dropping it because it's too heavy, or holding it in my hands too long and burning my fingers or anything of that nature. So landing areas just kind of increase safety and give us more flexibility when we're using various other areas of the kitchen. So moving on to the next slide. I don't know why I ended up with 3 slides, separate slides around countertops. I obviously didn't think this one through real well. But another thing around countertops or checkout aisles in grocery stores, those types of things, those large flat surfaces that we have all over the place that people seem to congregate around a lot, is varying the different heights. So if we vary the height of a kitchen's countertops, for instance, then we're ensuring that people of all sizes and abilities have a place to work. And kitchens and other sort of spaces like that, they're congregation spaces. So we want everybody to feel welcome and have a space that they're comfortable at. So if we vary countertops in our apartments, our houses, our workspaces, then they're sort of welcoming spaces for everybody, regardless of their size or their ability, or what they need to do. Help us cook, do their homework while I'm cooking, those types of things. All right, so those are just a handful of examples of some of the basic concepts of universal design. We focused in on the kitchen. These could be applied in a lot of different areas, and housing is probably the primary area we see discussion about universal design in. But this next slide, I'll take a little pause here, and this is going to be kind of a audience participation slide. And so we've talked through things like single lever faucets and landing zones, and floors that are clean and of obstacles, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to just take a pause here, and I want everybody to look at this slide, because there is probably a dozen great examples of universal design in this one picture alone from this bathroom. So take a look at it. And I don't know if you can enter stuff into the chat, but talk amongst yourselves for a second or two, and see how many options, how many examples of universal design in play that you can actually see in this picture of this bathroom. And then we will give it 10 or 15 seconds, and I will pop in some answers and see maybe what you all came up with.
And if it's not letting you type in the chat, you can also put it in the Q&A and I can read it out. That would be a workaround.
Should have the Jeopardy music going on.
Should I read them out as they come in, or?
Oh yeah.
All right, so
up there.
We've got that the bars are at different heights.
Good.
And that there is a shower bench.
Good.
And that's all we've got so far. Oh, there we have another one. Landing area of the bench, contrast of the white and the brown areas.
Uh-huh. All right, so some other things that we have in there as answers are coming in, and I hadn't touched on this yet, but this is part of the reason I put this slide in there. You'll notice that the area that the shampoo and conditioner and body gel and everything is a recessed area. And so that is another good universal design principle, or another example of universal design and the principles being applied. Recessed areas, they don't become obstacles. They're a little more forgiving in some respects for people of different abilities. We also have the single levered faucets there for the shower head, and that's also a detachable and movable shower head. So that might, if I'm 6'7", then I might want to leave it where it's at. But if I'm 3'7", then I obviously want to not drown myself, and so I might take it off, and that might be more appropriate for me as I'm bathing myself. The one thing that I didn't see the first couple of times I looked at this is over there on the wall, sort of on the right hand side, and it's kind of a little bit obscured by the shadow there, is a towel rack. And that towel rack has a variety of heights for people to put their towels on. So if I am using a wheelchair, then I might use those lower rungs. But if I am, again, 6'7", then I might be the user of those upper rungs. So there are rungs at all levels for all types of folks. So, the bath bench that is right in there, the whole idea of the it's not, well, it's a shower that I can walk into, I can roll in. There's no lip that I have to step over. It's not inserted into a bathtub. So it's a totally accessible shower. That'd be another great example of universal design. So anybody can get into that shower and utilize it. If I was going to make one criticism of this picture, it might be super hard for somebody to detach that particular shower head because of the height. But overall, there's a lot of great things in here that just make this a bathroom that vast majority of people, regardless of their abilities, are going to be able to use effectively and not even really realize that it's set up in a universal design way. It's just when their bodies meet this particular shower, it's going to work for them regardless. So it's designed for the margins in a lot of respect. So there was our list of some of the things, most of the things. Oh, I did have so the roll-in shower itself, the fact that it was a bench that was added, and that's an example of the aesthetic side of universal design. I mean, how many times have we tried to make a bathroom more functional, and we've gone out and bought a device, and people think, oh, it's just, for that person, but a bench is more inviting for a wider variety of people. We have the adjustable shower head, the grab bars, and we're actually going to talk a little about grab bars here in a minute. For some odd reason, we love this discussion at Missouri Institute of Technology. The single lever faucet, the recessed open shelving that I pointed out, and then the multi-height towel rack are the things in particular that I thought were well done and are a great example. And I know a lot of times we're retrofitting houses, or we've moved into an apartment that's not universally designed, but it's like all things around technology and access. If we can start chipping away at these things one by one and improve our safety and make our worlds more acceptable, then over time, all that stuff will add up. And man, the perfect thing in the world would be if we could just have tons more accessible, universally designed housing. So let's move on to a couple of other things sort of around the idea of housing that I wanted to talk about. So one of the big changes here, and it's kind of we sometimes need to sort of change our thinking or become more aware of what's out there to help us change our thinking. Grab bars. There are so many different ways that they are very important in a home, but they don't have to be institutional anymore. If you spend some time in the big box stores or online, there are gazillions of great examples out there of how people who make some of these products are beginning to realize that they need to think differently about the products they're putting out there, because they need to start reflecting the fact more people with disabilities live independently, that we are not all the same, that we're an aging society. So they're starting to build in a lot more aesthetic qualities. You still have the solidity of a good grab bar with all these, and they still attach the same way, but they're starting to become more decorative, and we're starting to get some creative options out there. Like over on the right hand side, I thought I had not seen this one before. This is a grab bar. A couple of things that really caught my attention about it. The first one is it's that curved horseshoe appearance, and so think back to people that and you begin to realize that sometimes the way that we are grasping grab bars may not be the best way for all of us. But on that one, I can work in a narrow area, and I can have, which is when I'm turning that knob that's controlling my shower head and my spout, I can grab a hold of that. And I don't have to have my arms stretched out, so I might feel more safe by that approach to it. And it's also located in an area where probably the chances of my slipping are probably pretty high, right up there as I'm adjusting the shower head. If I can be grabbing hold of that as I'm adjusting that temperature, then if I get it a little too cold or a little too hot and I jump, then I might be more secure because I have both of my hands on that as I'm getting a sense for the water temperature. One of the things that I think is slightly funny as I've been kind of digging in and looking at some of the new options that are out there for grab bars. For a million years, we told everybody that a towel rack should not be used as a grab bar. Ironically, they're starting to design grab bars that can be used as a towel rack as well. So they have the strength and the attachment, et cetera, that makes them good as a grab bar. But they're also kind of selling them as towel holders, and don't know how I feel about that. One other thing I wanted to say about the grab bar over there on the right, besides the fact that it is a different design, it also is more secure. It actually has 4 points of contact with how it's attached to the wall, which is even more safety and makes it even more useful for some people, but it is also attractive. And so again, universal design doesn't have to look like it's institutional design. If it's done well, it can be aesthetic as well and pleasing to everybody, not just accessible, but pleasing and accessible. Let's move on to the next slide. The Internet of Things. We've touched on home automation, and there are lots of great things that are out there. But a lot of times, if you kind of think hard about the Internet of Things, although the Wi-Fi thermostats and doorbell cameras and smoke detectors, which we see illustrated here, and is the Internet of Things begins to expand in terms of the types of appliances and operations that we can do remotely, you begin to realize that this is a great example of universal design as well. And I've always been fascinated by the fact that there were sort of two camps when all these devices started coming out. The first camp were the individuals who generally didn't have disabilities, who saw these things and thought, wow, that's super cool. I like that. It makes my life easier. Or it's just kind of fun. Or I just kind of like technology. And so I want to incorporate these things into my home. Simultaneous to all of those people coming up with ideas, I remember a lot of folks I know with disabilities who instantly looked at the Internet of Things and said, oh my gosh, this is a game changer because now I can do fill in the blank, ABCD, or I have better security because I can have a doorbell on the outside of my house. You know, lots of great, two different groups of folks looking at the same thing, having completely different feelings towards it. And that's one of the things we see a lot with the Internet of Things, because it's flexible in use. It can be used regardless of your abilities or your disabilities. A lot of times they have some level of auditory feedback or tactile feedback, either through the app or maybe on the device itself. They build in, one of my favorite examples is in the upper right-hand corner there, that smoke detector that comes out by the folks who were behind Nest. It's a universally designed smoke detector because not only does it emit a sound, it also can provide me with notifications on my phone, and it emits a light. So there are multiple ways of representation there in terms of it informing you that there is something wrong in your home, and it's all built into one. So that sort of makes it a universally designed item there that's effective for a wider group of people. So, lots of ways we can work the Internet of Things into our homes, into our workspaces, and it is a great example of how mainstream technology is beginning to design things in a way that make them usable by the broadest group of folks possible. We see that same thing in the next slide, because again, universal design is far more than just houses or buildings. It's all the products that we have in our world. And the computer manufacturers, the big three, Google, Microsoft, and Apple, have very effectively been designing products for a number of years now and increasing the universal design features that are built into them. And these are just three screenshots that I put together on this slide from the area on each one of these companies' websites that talk about the accessibility features. They're not calling them universal design, they still call them accessibility features, but they are essentially universal design. So they're universal design in the sense of that product is now flexible, they've increased the intuitiveness of its use, they've increased the options to make it error-free for my usage with some of the tools that are built in. And I say this probably more times than people want me to hear it, but if you are not familiar, whether you use an Apple product or a Chromebook or a Windows-based system, if you have not spent time exploring the accessibility options that are built in, then I highly encourage you to do that, because we now are starting to see these products, computer-based products, tablets, laptops, desktops, as well as other items that are out there on the mainstream market, designed in such a way that when I go to the store and buy it, doesn't matter what my abilities are, I can pretty much open up that box, set it up in a way that matches my needs and enables me to then go forth and accomplish whatever I want to accomplish with that tool. So I think this is a really cool trend, and one in which we're seeing a lot of incorporation of universal design principles in mainstream technology. All right, so let's move on to one other area. A lot of times we think about universal design in a housing context. We're seeing it in the computer space. We're seeing it in the Internet of Things. But it's always important to remember it applies to everything in our built environment. And that also includes how we design and share content online in particular. And there's a whole discussion around universal design in this arena as well. Unfortunately, it's usually, well, not unfortunately, a lot of times it's going to be referred to as ICT, information communication technology, but it's essentially the idea of driving what is out there and how we communicate online and in other arenas, so that it is designed in a manner that is universal to everybody, regardless of their abilities. And so there's a principle that goes around a lot of content, especially online content, that's referred to as POUR. And so POUR, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And so on this slide, we have the first two letters, the P and the O. The P is perceivable. And so that means that whatever content we're making, that we need to make it possible for all individuals to see and hear the information. So for instance, this video that we will do of this session, when we put it out on YouTube, we need to make sure that everybody has access to this content. So we'll have captioning, for instance, or if I'm a screen reader user, I'm not seeing graphics, but I can have them explained to me, audible to me. And so but those are all examples of perceivable. Operable is that all the content that we're putting out there is navigable by all individuals, so that they can use that information independently using their preferred tools. So if some folks aren't going to use a keyboard or a mouse, they're going to do stuff through voice input. So I need to make sure that what I'm putting out there will work with voice input. Or some folks might just use their mouse or their keyboard, and whatever I'm putting out there needs to be usable independently, so that folks can navigate it regardless of whatever their preferred tool is. On the next slide, the second two letters, POUR, the understandable, the U, obviously, and robust, the R. Understandable in the idea of POUR is that content supports individuals in understanding through a consistent and predictable design. So you might, if you've ever spent any time trying to figure out how to make your online content more accessible to folks, you've probably heard discussions about using headings. That would be a way of making things consistent. Using plain language makes it a little more understandable, more predictable for folks. How we lay out websites, those types of things would all kind of fall under this heading of understandable. But the idea is to create content so that everybody has access to it. And then robust is that the content that we are producing and we're putting on to our websites, through social media, et cetera, are robust in the sense of they are acceptable and can be used equally as well, regardless of the type of device that I'm using. So whether I'm using a laptop, my smartphone, maybe I'm using some assistive technology, that content is able to work with all those types of devices, and it is giving me the same information and navigates the same and is understandable the same. So again, they refer to it as the POUR principle: perceivable, operable, understandable, robust. And it kind of breaks down a somewhat complex topic, but essentially what we're talking about here for our online content is another example of universal design and how we need to be paying attention to it to create a more inclusive world that is accepting for all the abilities that are out there. Moving on to the next slide. Oh, I guess that was my last slide for this. Actually, I have one other. So on how to fund technology, we have our STAR that we've worked on a couple of times here about funding sources, both private and public, for assistive technology. Going to get on my soapbox here for just a second, but this is really an advocacy issue. That it would be great. There are ways we can fund adaptations. There are ways that universal design and increasing universal design housing are happening here in Missouri and elsewhere. But when we stop and realize demographic trends, and we stop and we realize how much difference there is between us and our abilities, our body sizes, et cetera, this is a great advocacy issue, as well as something, because we need to increase universal design, especially in housing. So that was my quick soapbox. Sorry. If you aren't familiar with Missouri Assistive Technology, our website, at.mo.gov, And we have a number of programs that help people acquire assistive technology. We help people explore assistive technology. We do a lot of training on assistive technology, a lot of information and assistance. So I know many of you, I was kind of looking through the list, many of you are familiar with us, but if you have never spent time on our website or just felt free to email us or give us a call about something you've been curious about, we strongly encourage you do that, so that all of us can build our capacity and become smarter and more effective in what we do around technology for the folks, for ourselves or the folks we work with.
Okay, I'm going to start reading. There's one or two questions in the chat, so I'll start reading those. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to go ahead and put those in there. First was actually a comment, not a question. People are liking the book club idea, so but then we also had somebody was saying that the towel rack in that bathroom picture looked like it was heated, and was wondering if anybody had any thoughts or experience with heated towel racks and has any thoughts on that as far as safety.
Oh, fabulous question. I don't yet. You've given me a research project. I appreciate that. I love that.
The next one, I'm not sure that it would be a question for you or we could direct them somewhere. But wanting to know how to get qualified for these types of modifications in your home on a waiver.
That unfortunately I don't know the answer for. I would reach out to DMH or the division and kind of talk it through, maybe with a case manager or somebody that has far more knowledge on that than I do, because I know there are some environmental adaptations that you can work in. And I'll stop there for fear I say something.
Okay, so as a reminder, these slides and recording will get sent out. Just some quick announcements before we go. Our next benefit series is on October 11th. That's on Medicare annual open enrollment and importance of drug plan comparison. Those benefit series are going to be the second Wednesday of every month from 12:30 to 1:30. And then for the rest of the year, we've only got 2 more mods for the year. On October 25th, we have AT for employment, and on November 15th, we have AT for hobbies and pets. That one is shifted. I believe it's a week up, a week sooner than it usually is. That way it's not bumping up with the holidays. And then the December one was canceled for the holidays. I think we might have another question come in.
Yeah, I'm going to interject real quick. Lisa, I saw you put a link in there. Is that a link to possible answers for the question that was asked about the waiver?
I think it might be, so I'll go ahead and put it in the full chat so that everybody can see it. That was some further resources, and then any waiver questions, you can reach out to the DMH regional office as well. And then a couple more things here. We have Missouri Family to Family that is housed at the Institute for Human Development. Their website is there. They have Good Life groups that are interactive peer learning collaboratives. Those are super great for hands-on learning and building the capacity of self-advocates and family members. They also have their CTLC and F2F quarterly stakeholder meetings. We just had one last week, which was super great to get to see people in person. And then for further information and training on charting the life course tools that I talked about in the beginning, you can go to lifecoursetools.org, and there is all of our trainings and tools on there. And we'll pull up our contact information, and I think we might have gotten a couple more comments in the Q&A. sorry, we have Division of Senior and Disability Services at the Department of Health also has options for the aging and physically disabled population. And reaching out to the folks in charge of the Universal Design team at the division for specific technology funding questions for any type of waiver related things. But all right. Thank you all for your information sharing in the Q&A. And thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.